now we have one person dedicated to going out and providing technical expertise for energy performance contracting to both local and state localities and state agencies. By way of comparison, North Carolina has 5 folks that are dedicated to that. So we're adding 7%. Another component from a funding standpoint is Division of Energy has received $275,000 to conduct a proof of concept energy tracking and analysis program. The intent is to select a number of buildings within state government, track in real time the energy consumption of those facilities to identify areas of cost savings to justify a greater deployment of such technology. Much of Virginia state government, frankly, we just don't know. We know how much energy we consume. We don't know where that consumption takes place on a real-time basis, and that makes it very difficult for us to pinpoint areas that are kind of low-hanging fruit for reducing consumption. And so we feel like this proof of concept program is going to give us a roadmap to be able to do a larger deployment of that. In spring of 2015, the governor created the Executive Committee on Energy Efficiency, and the purpose is to identify how to measure the state's voluntary 10% retail consumption reduction goal by 2020, and then to determine where the state currently stands in meeting that goal. It's interesting when you put a goal in place in 2007 and you step in 2016 and no one knows where we are in terms of achieving that goal. And no one really knows how we're measuring that goal. I know Dominion has committed and they have been tracking it in their particular way, but there's been no statewide kind of uniform way by which people understand where we are in terms of the goal and how we're actually reaching it. So the committee has actually come up with a mechanism that everyone agreed on the committee by which we will measure, which is essentially a stacking approach. And it's not going to be a cumulative, so we don't add up that 10% over the course of the years leading up to 2020. We actually initiate measures leading up to, and then in 2020, that's when we determine if we have achieved the goal. Now we can do interim updates to see where we are, see what is working, what isn't working, but the intent is to, by 2020 or in 2020, determine that we've reached the goal. 10% is roughly 10.9 million megawatt hours. That's right out for our total consumption, about 109 million megawatt hours.
Yes.
Yeah. So the intent is to find, understand what programs, what initiatives are taking place, measure and verify the savings that are coming out of those programs, essentially stack those savings on top of one another, and by 2020 or in 2020 get to that goal. That group will come back together in the spring. As most things do in state government, we tend to focus our efforts on the fine 140 members that come into town on 45 and 60-day increments. And so now that we're in session, we're in spring and out of session, the executive committee will get back together and we'll be able to move forward on that. And then the governor recently signed legislation just within the last couple of weeks that instructs the State Corporation Commission to evaluate the establishment of uniform protocols for energy measurement and verification for utility-sponsored energy efficiency programs. We don't have uniform protocols that are used. I know the utility-sponsored programs that Dominion puts forth, they have their folks that measure the effectiveness of their programs. Appalachian Power does the same thing. The challenge is when the SEC gets that information, they kind of do their inward analysis and come out, and we all kind of hope that they will either approve programs or in the case of the utilities, actually approve cost recovery for the programs and lost revenue, which is one of the mechanisms to try and incentivize utility programs to be more robust. So what the intent here is to try and get an open, transparent process by which the SEC evaluates what type of uniform protocols are being used in other states and what may be the most appropriate mechanism for Virginia. And just, it may be relevant for this group as well. They will also be looking at what appropriate formula could be used for the levelized cost of saved energy. We use levelized cost to try and do an apples-to-apples comparison for various generation sources. Levelized cost of saved energy is being used as a way to kind of equate energy efficiency to the more traditional generating sources. So we'll be participating in that, and I know that SEC is anxious to get started on that quickly, so they'll be opening a docket and doing a formal proceeding sooner rather than later on that. Excuse me. One last thing on the energy growth sector generally, and this is outside clean energy, but there's a program that the governor instituted called Going Global with Coal and Energy Technology. It is a partnership between the Virginia Coalfields Economic Development Authority and the Virginia Economic Development Partnership to help coal supply chain companies look internationally to diversify their client base. We have a program existing in VEDP called the Valet Program, which is a 2-year program that helps get companies ready to market themselves internationally. VCEDA, the Coalfields Economic Development Authority, actually sponsored up to 10 positions. There's 6 companies that are going through it now. We anticipate another at least 3 companies that will go through over the course of the next year for a second 2-year program. And the intent of that is to try and find ways to get folks in Southwest, get folks in the coalfields region of Virginia thinking more internationally about how their products can be used by folks outside of the Southwest Virginia coal industry. Very, very quickly, expanding best-in-class infrastructure. I think we are all aware, if you read any energy news in Virginia, about the proposed Atlantic Coast and Mountain Valley natural gas pipelines. The intent of those is to bring Utica and Marcellus shale gas into Virginia, and Atlantic Coast Pipeline's case through Virginia down into North Carolina. The governor has come out in support of both of those, but it is a federal process by which those will either be approved or not approved. We are realizing and seeing that natural gas is going to be a generation fuel source for years to come. We in Virginia currently don't have access to the Marcellus or Utica shale gas. All of the gas that we've traditionally gotten has come up from the Gulf, and so we just don't have the transmission infrastructure to bring that stuff that's on our doorstep into Virginia for economic development, generation, manufacturing purposes. And so we see those as value add from an economic development standpoint, economic diversification standpoint to Virginia. Talent development in the energy sector, the governor conducted a competition for talent solutions and awarded $200,000 to Old Dominion Electric Co-op to partner with Southside Community College to create a certification program for linemen, transmission distribution linemen. We see that as pretty big. I mean, this governor is very focused on workforce, very focused on apprenticeships, credentialing, certification, and we see this as a great opportunity to start to replenish the what will be the impending loss of mainly through retirements linemen throughout the Commonwealth, and Old Dominion Electric Co-op is taking the lead on that. Second, the governor conducted a business plan competition which awarded grants to 2 energy-related startups, and both will relocate to Virginia to continue their push for commercialization of the products that they have. And then last, advanced vehicle technology and alternative fuels. To be frank, I think we are very far behind on the goals that we put forth within this bucket, but 2 things that we have done is the Commonwealth Transportation Board set aside about 3 years ago some federal congestion mitigation dollars to help convert state fleet vehicles to alternative fuels. We have opened that up to localities, and a couple of localities have already taken advantage of it. Richmond City and Chesapeake are 2 that have started to convert more of their vehicles to alternative fuels using some of these GAP funds. And then the second thing is we have partnered with Maryland to use federal funds to deploy more alternative fueling infrastructure, particularly around ethanol. And we're excited about getting more of that infrastructure out into Virginia. Much more to be done on this, frankly, and we're looking to push through in the last couple of years of the administration to really beef this up. the economics are a little bit challenging with gas prices as low as they are, although natural gas prices are pretty darn low as well. But we'll continue to work with folks in the private sector on that. But I think we need to do a better job within state government to really try and convert more of our fleets to natural gas and other alternative fuels. So with that, I am happy to take in any questions. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to come and give you guys a little bit of a broader context on what's going on in the Virginia energy sector as it relates to the governor's policy. So thank you.
Thank you, Hayes. Comments or questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Just a short one. Are there any specific issues that the governor is dealing with that this authority can help clarify?
That's a good question. I think there are some, we are thinking generally about workforce from a nuclear industry perspective. We have beefed up substantially our workforce contingent within the Secretary of Commerce and Trade. We actually now have 3 full-time folks working on workforce policy within the Secretariat. And I think that's something that they have started to think about. I know that Marshall is beginning to have conversations with them. But I think those are conversations that should continue and maybe accelerate as they're thinking about excuse me, how the workforce universe in Virginia gets more streamlined and can be worked more effectively and not at cross purposes. So I think from a workforce standpoint, that's probably really the top priority from the governor's perspective as it relates to the nuclear industry.
Hayes, I hear you talk about the Virginia Solar Energy Development Authority, and we were made aware that there's a wind authority also. And I suspect there may be other authorities. I'm just not familiar with them. I would think it would be good for us to get a sense of what they're doing and collaborate with them to some extent, because we in the nuclear community applaud the fact that you should be looking at a combination of different energy sources. We don't believe nuclear is the only answer. We just think it has to be a part of the answer. And in order for that to happen, if you're going to have the appropriate level of diversification, you need to have an understanding of what the pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages of those energy sources are, because they're not all created equal. So we would like for you to consider taking back to the governor the consideration that maybe we come together and work with the other authorities that are governing other energy sources in the state of Virginia, so we can have a collaboration document or a dialogue that talks about how we can all collaborate and work together for the best interest of ensuring there's an appropriate diversification of energy sources here.
That's a good thought. I wonder if it may be worth getting the chairs of the respective authorities together for at least an initial conversation.
That might be a part of it. I was going to leave that to you. That's certainly one of the things that might be considered, but I throw the concept over the wall to you, and let's see what we can do to make sure we're looking out for the best interest of the constituency here at the Commonwealth.
Great suggestion.
If I may, Don, it may be worth putting together a 2 or 3 page fact sheet on the kinds of talent that are coming up in the nuclear business, because we manufacture and engineer for nuclear in the state of Virginia. If you look at where solar panels and wind turbines are manufactured, DOE was lamenting that it's now less than 10% market share for the United States. So we're installing more solar and more wind in the United States. It's made in Germany and Asia. And it may be worth noting that in terms of the talent pool. What kinds of jobs, engineering, manufacturing, are created in nuclear, what kind are created in solar, installers rather than manufacturers, likewise wind.
That's a good thought.
That's one of the things we want to discuss when we get there. I mean, there's a number of other topics, but I certainly agree that's one of them. Is a number of activities that we believe are going to stimulate the actual economy in the country and allow us to bring home to our own country our manufacturing capabilities, more jobs here at home that actually help us with our energy issues. Because right now, as stated, a great deal of that activity, right or wrong, is being done someplace else.
Yeah, and certainly out in the southeast, particularly, there just has not been a robust pipeline of deployment for some of those renewables. We're talking about wind particularly, but solar a little less of, and certainly in Virginia that's the case. And so without that pipeline of projects, it's hard to actually attract the supply chain into the area. From an offshore wind perspective, now we get into a whole nother kind of beast, because that industry simply does not exist in the United States.
We know that issue quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Alice, you can
Gas
comment
is
on
too
that one.
cheap.
And so that's something frankly, we think Virginia, the Hampton Roads region particularly, is well placed on the East Coast to be a hub, but the pipeline has to be there. And from a solar perspective, that's what we're trying to do with the governor's initiatives, is create a pipeline of projects that will actually attract not only the folks who are just trying to get these projects off the ground, but the manufacturing, the solar panels, and various things like that. So having an idea of the talent needs of that type of supply chain, I think, is critically important from a nuclear perspective. Specifically, you know, we've kind of got our nuclear hub in Lynchburg, in that area, and to the extent that our workforce people understand what they can do to help further attract that type of talent into Virginia, I think would be incredible.
Well, we could, this conversation can go on and on, but I do think if we have this dialogue, we have very unique assets and resources of individuals who can bring a lot of value to this conversation, irrespective of whether it's just nuclear, wind, solar, and so on and so forth. So I strongly urge you to exercise that. And of course, with our unique situation with our universities here in the Commonwealth, we are truly positioned to be the nation's leader in these activities, and we should take advantage of that and leverage that for the state of Virginia.
And I'll put and I don't want to monopolize too much of the time, because I know you guys have other stuff to talk about. I will put in just another plug for the traditional lack of statewide state government investment in energy policy specifically. The Division of Energy is a very, very small portion of the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. The Division of Energy has used the minimal investment from the state to leverage to get significant federal funds just to be able to staff. We think about, and I would rarely would I actually compare Virginia to New York, but NYSERDA is a gigantic energy policy engine.
And financing on it.
Financing arm as well. Colorado has a very robust energy office. Maryland, at least under the previous governor, had a very robust and proactive energy office. We just have not had the resources in Virginia to do that. And creating these authorities is a way to bring the private sector into the conversation. But without the resources to be able to drive policy at the, I don't use this term negatively, at the bureaucratic level, to make sure that that policy transcends the inevitable 4-year cycles of our gubernatorial administrations, we're not going to be able to be proactive. So we need the energy office to be that driver. The Commonwealth's energy policy is an all of the above energy policy. It is in code, it's in statute. And it is not embedded in state government at this point to the degree at which it needs to be. And so my plug is, whenever you talk to your fine legislators and your fine representatives, the more investment we can make in understanding the energy landscape in Virginia from a policy perspective, the better that we can do in the medium and long term to try and drive these types of conversations.
Understand that Virginia's not unlike many other states that have the same kinds of problems, and what we're discovering is in many of those states, they are trying to do it on a statewide basis without any consideration for their neighboring state activities. Well, obviously, that's just simply not going to work, because there's exporting and importing across state lines going on a routine basis. Hence, why we believe from this perspective we need to not only do it with what Virginia wants to do, but considering what the rest of the nation's doing. So we're looking at it from a state, a regional, and a national perspective, looking at policies. Because right now, this country doesn't have an energy policy. The market dictates and drives it. Well, at some point, the public should be outraged by that. So it is our hope that we can have a policy that allows itself to be informed on a routine basis, so we can make informed and knowledgeable decisions about energy sources and percentages and activities and things that we do and how we fund them, to make sure that there is this quote-unquote all the above, and all of the constituency feel comfortable and confident there will always be available, affordable, reliable energy that's environmentally friendly. So, with that, I think you're down to 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, well, I'll just do a flyover.
So see if you can talk as fast as
I can do a segue from the point that Hayes was making. This is the national map on renewable deployment, just to highlight a couple of points of depth behind what you were talking about. What's interesting is when you look at it nationally, we have an all above strategy, quote unquote, but it's fragmented. And so if you look at where wind is actually deployed, it's not often near nuclear. In fact, most of the wind is to the west of the Mississippi. Likewise, solar is in the southwest predominantly, even though they're putting panels on roofs in New Jersey. So once you break it down, Don's right. We have some national kinds of feel for where we're headed, but very severe regional differences, and that affects what we can deploy. So let me do it this way, if I could, Don. I was privileged to come to you in August to talk about the global picture and what that means for Virginia and broadly the Southeast. So our group, Environmental Business International, pays a lot of attention to market and to public financing trends and policy. In policy, as a PhD student at George Mason, we're very involved in these issues. We'd be happy to meet with you and go over these issues. We've got some resources in policy. We like a lot of what our brethren are doing at VCU in Virginia and Virginia Tech in engineering. We bow in their direction each morning in engineering. We're pretty good at policy, we're a little closer to the Beltway. And then lastly, we have Verdigris Capital, which is really focused on the public finance mission. And so we've got some innovative ideas because Walter Hauser was the first director of the DOE loan program. So we've got some expertise in public finance. All right, so in short form, as Don mentioned, we'll make these slides available to you. So don't worry about taking notes, I just want to mention some of the high points. We face a nuclear cliff depending on what Dominion and other owners do with going from 60 years to 80 years. There's a talent issue here, Dean Tapper, in terms of engineers. Engineers are going to have to do that. There's a lot of engineering associated with going from 60 years to 80 years. So that's on the table. That would extend the curve, but without new build, what Lamar Alexander has said, and what our ANS committee is focused on, is what does the USA look like without nuclear? Not only from an energy standpoint, but from a global leadership standpoint. Is nuclear something we just want to turn our backs on like Germany did and leave it to the rest of the world? We would submit no, that we have a national and global leadership proposition there. So this is going to be taken up in the Senate over the coming year. What's interesting is coming off of COP21, our own energy secretary, Democrat, Ernie Moniz, Dr. Moniz, and Jim Hansen, the noted climate scientist, aver strongly that nuclear must be part of the solution, which is what Don has been saying. That came through in COP21. But we face some vulnerabilities. What's interesting here is that most of them are in the Big Ten Rust Belt states because of the market factors in cheap gas. This is a bigger view of it. We're looking at this, Don, in the ANS committee. I think we should bring the No Nuclear report to this group, at the next meeting.
It's my intent to share all the things we're creating with you.
This is on the human resource issue. You said the talent issue. Don presented this at the ANS meeting, of course, close to hearts for all the nuclear engineers. You cannot sustain a U.S. nuclear industry with episodic construction. Now, we are going to face a retirement wave, as Dean Tapper pointed out. That's going to employ some nuclear engineers. But to be a global leader, we're going to have to be focused on the twin goals of new construction with some advanced reactor technology and license renewal. That's really going to be the strategy going forward. So what's interesting is that Britain has now kind of given us a forecast for that challenge. So under the Blair Labour government, they debated this wind and solar only policy versus how much do we include nuclear. They decided that after doing the mathematics behind it, to meet their carbon budget, they need to build new 16 gigawatts. What's interesting and trend-setting about the UK right now is they're going offshore for the financing. Not only does France own their fleet now since 2008, but now France and Britain both have had to go to China, I'm going to say hat in hand, to help finance this kind of construction wave, which is in the tens of billions of dollars. And so China is bidding on Hinkley Point as an equity investor, And in addition to that, they want to reserve options for 2 plants on the eastern shore of Britain. This is the first global consortium financing of new construction in the world. Trend setting. So what does that mean for us here? Well, most of the reactor build now is outside of the NATO countries. It's in Asia and the Middle East. There will be some construction for replacement, particularly here in the US. And what's the driver? Premium reliability for urban growth without emissions. It's urban growth and the need for 24/7 reliable clean power that's driving new reactor construction worldwide. That's the number one issue. What's interesting for this group, I'm glad Mary Alice is back in now, since we're talking about the global scene, and we just had a map here on Hinkley Point and France and the UK. So.
Exciting ride that one.
Yeah.
Sad but true.
What is important is that our southeast region, and it's important to see Virginia in a league, like you do the ACC and the SEC, is the region in the United States that wields superior factors for deployment. We're seeing that with Vogtle and with Summer, obviously. So that's the point here, is to see Virginia in this leading region. We would also highlight that in the Middle East, desalination is a rising end use. It's not just power. They need water in a lot of these countries as well, and they need them in big cities. So those twin end uses are going to be driving new nuclear in the future. Let me just fast forward through this. This is some of the analysis that has been going on in terms of national nuclear strategy. We came out with redefining leadership when we did a partnership with the Atlantic Council. And now it's clear that no country is self-sufficient in nuclear power, was the bottom line. We have to strike international alliances. What's interesting is the universities in Virginia are already doing that. How many international students do you have in the graduate level, Dr. Tepper?
It's a huge number.
Yeah, it's over 50%.
It's over 50%.
Yeah. So we already have on-ramps to this international intelligence through the graduate student populations in our engineering schools. It's the same elsewhere, I think, at some of the laboratories. So international alliances are really what's building these plants going forward. So you look at Vogtle, who's in the deal? Westinghouse is the marquee, but Toshiba's behind it. Shaw's been absorbed by Westinghouse. Doosan's making some of the cabling and components. It's a Korean company on our own shores. A lot of engineering done in the US, but a lot of international partnerships. We presented some of this at the Nuclear Infrastructure Council, and Don, I think you're a member of the board now on the NIC groups. And so they're very focused on exports, because look at the growth curve for the global market. China, India, and the Middle East. And here's why. So here's nuclear capacity by decade, 1990, right? The size of the circle is the amount of nuclear capacity. Here's 2010, here's 2030. Look at that sequence again. 1990, 2010, 2030. The biggest growth in nuclear construction is the same region that had Fukushima. Fukushima is not stopping growth in Asia. It paused, but they're moving ahead. And here's why. Look at the population growth in the world. Those are the major cities that need reliable, clean energy. And so what the lesson for Virginia and other states in the southeast region is, we must export. We have to have international markets in mind going forward over the next 20 and 30 years. And the supplier chain has got that. Here's a list of the cities. You see how many are in Asia. These are cities above 10 million in population. That's going to be the number one driver for nuclear going forward. The other driver in Asia that we take for granted here is land use. Look at how much space you need for a wind farm or even utility scale solar compared to the nuclear plant. They just don't have that space in places like Korea and Japan and Britain. That's another reason why Britain decided not to rely solely on wind and solar. Look at this development curve. Look at the contrast between Shanghai in 1990, Shanghai in 2010. Look at the Middle East city, marquee city. Dubai, 1990, 2010.
How are you going to power these places? Likewise, the largest automobile manufacturing plant, this is on the industrial side, in the world is in South Korea. They have 6 nuclear plants around the corner from this plant, powering it. Now you see they've covered a lot of the roof with solar.